Okay, let's start talking about chapter 5, which is in unit 2, starting and growing a business. We're going to be looking at small businesses, entrepreneurship, and franchising. Once you've decided what kind of a business you want to be, then you need to be thinking about how you're going to go about achieving that. The first one we're going to look at is the entrepreneur. And entrepreneurship is the process of creating and managing a business to achieve desired objectives. These are just some of the things that when we think of an entrepreneur, they're moving because many small businesses are beginning to emerge. Technology is so easy to obtain for small businesses now and very affordable. And it's a growing trend among businesses is the social entrepreneurship who uses the social to address social problems within our culture. This slide is just great entrepreneurs that we think about when we think of an entrepreneur. The next slide talks about Steve Jobs, and he talks about how he started Apple, which I think Steve Jobs was just a phenomenal person, and also Bill Gates. Both of those were very young people when they started their businesses, and of course today both of these are worth billions of dollars.
I was lucky. I found what I loved to do early in life. Woz and I started Apple in my parents' garage when I was 20. We worked hard, and in 10 years, Apple had grown from just the two of us in a garage into a $2 billion company with over 4,000 employees. We just released our finest creation, the Macintosh, a year earlier, and I just turned 30. And then I got fired. How can you get fired from a company you started? What had been the focus of my entire adult life was gone, and it was devastating. I really didn't know what to do for a few months. I felt that I'd let the previous generation of entrepreneurs down. I was a very public failure, and I even thought about running away from the valley. But something slowly began to dawn on me. I still loved what I did.
We are going to make it or break it based on whether we can provide products to higher education and services and relationships to higher education that no one else provides. And I think we ought to spend 100% of our time thinking about that. And if we can't do that, then we ought to go broke.
And so I decided to start over. I didn't see it then, but it turned out that getting fired from Apple was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. The heaviness of being successful was replaced by the lightness of being a beginner again, less sure about everything. It freed me to enter one of the most creative periods of my life. During the next 5 years, I started a company named Next, another company named Pixar, and fell in love with an amazing woman who would become my wife. I'm pretty sure none of this would have happened if I hadn't been fired from Apple. It was awful tasting medicine, but I guess the patient needed it. Sometimes life's going to hit you in the head with a brick. Don't lose faith. I'm convinced that the only thing that kept me going was that I loved what I did. You've got to find what you love, and that is as true for work as it is for your lovers. Your work is going to fill a large part of your life, and the only way to be truly satisfied is to do what you believe is great work. And the only way to do great work is to love what you do. If you haven't found it yet, keep looking, and don't settle. So keep looking, don't settle.
So, what is a small business? A small business is difficult to answer because we think of the term small as being relative. If you look at this slide, it says a small business generally employs less than 500 people. And to me, that would be, a large business. But in the eyes of the small business, the SBA, which we'll talk more about later, it's an independent agency of the federal government, and they're there to help you as a small business. And generally, they will not loan money or talk to anyone that has 501 employees. It has to be less than 500. This slide just both these slides just basically give you some statistics on the role of small business within the American economy. This one gives you the number of firms. If you'll notice that 19 and less make up most of the percentages of all firms within the United States. Let's talk about women and minority-owned businesses. Small businesses do provide opportunities for women and minorities to succeed. I thought it was interesting to know that women own more than 10 million businesses nationwide, and they're responsible for employing millions of workers. Women generally go into professional services such as hair salons, nail salons, different things like that, retail, communications, and then some administrative services. Minority-owned businesses is growing faster than any other classifiable firm, and it represents almost 15% of all small businesses. The innovation of successful firms are going to take many forms. For instance, small firms make up 52% of home-based businesses. I think of Avon as a home-based, the jewelry that's sold online, Plexus, the energy drink, different things like that. And then 2% of those are franchises. Many of today's largest businesses started off as small firms that used innovation to achieve their success. Remember, entrepreneurs usually provide fresh ideas, and they have a greater flexibility to change than larger firms. One of the new small business that has emerged and is among Forbes top 20 small workplaces in America is Allegiant Travel. It is a publicly traded company that operates and schedules charter flights. Now, the next two slides are from Shark Tank, and the first one, they're both about the same business. I want you to watch these and see if you can figure out what's going to happen with these two men that have gone on Shark Tank trying to get financing for their business. And it was in our book, and I thought that was very funny that one of the ones I wanted to use happened to be in our book, and it is that UniKey is one of the most significant strengths of small businesses is their ability to innovate and bring significant benefits to their company. They actually invented a way to keep doors locked, and this is just a small example of a small company that was successful and actually went on Shark Tank and got funding from I think all the sharks were just anxious to get in there and get a piece of this pie. Some of the industries that attract small business, attract small businesses, first of all, is retailing, wholesaling, and that's when they acquire their goods from producers or wholesalers, and then they sell them. The service sector, which is 80% of U.S. jobs, They are businesses that don't actually produce tangible goods. Now remember, chapter 1, we talked about tangible and intangible. Tangible goods are something that you can put your hand on. Intangible are ideas and things like that. Retailing and manufacturing is just can provide unique opportunity for small businesses. To me, this would be a hard area to get into because of the cost of machinery. And then, of course, technology, that's just an area that is wide open for both large and small businesses. This is just some examples of small businesses, retailing and wholesaling stores, music, sporting goods, drugs, stores, restaurants. Service sector businesses would include banks, barbershop, real estate. I also would include nail salons and hair salons in these. These are the advantages and the disadvantages of small business ownerships, and we'll discuss those in more depth. This is just some successful traits of young entrepreneurs that that have made these people be able to be successful in their areas. Now, one of the advantages of being a small business owner is independence. To do better for themselves, they could do by remaining with their current employer or even changing jobs. They have the ability to choose whom they work with, when they work, where they work, whether or not they want to work in a family setting. I remember in the Steve Jobs video at the beginning, he talked about that he actually started his business, and I think if I remember right, it was in his parents' garage. So Microsoft, they began in a dorm room. So that is one of the advantages, is independence. Cost. As a small business owner, you're going to spend less money on wages, salaries, rent, utilities. You also have the option of, instead of hiring a bookkeeper, you can, what we call, outsource it to do your accounting, your advertising, your legal. And you also have friends and family that volunteer time to work on projects. I know a friend of ours have just opened up a new business, and my husband has gone over and helped them build shelves and different things like that. And of course, he didn't charge them. So these are just ways that it would cut down if you were a small business versus a large organization. You have flexibility. With being a small business, you can adapt to changing market demands. We'll talk about that when we get into the market segmentation. Usually you only have one layer of management, the owner. So decisions can be made quickly. You don't have to go up the chain of command before you make a decision. Also, as a small business, you can focus on a precisely defined market niche, a specific group or customs. You know, that's where your focus is going to be. And then reputation. Because of their capacity to focus on that narrow niche, they can develop reputations for being able to provide quality and service that the people want. So let's talk about some of the disadvantages. Probably the number one disadvantage is that being a business owner does have a high stress level. Generally, being a business owner, it's going to provide a living for your owner, but not much more. Generally, you're not going to make $1 million your first 1 to 5 years. You have to worry about competition, employee problems, equipment, expanding, rent increases. These are just some things that you may not have been prepared for. Generally, a small business person has to multitask. They have to be the owner, the manager, the salesperson, the shipping and receiving, bookkeeping, custodian. Multitasking can result in long hours for the owners. Another disadvantage is high failure rate. Half of all small businesses are going to fail within the first 5 years. Generally, it's because of undercapitalization, which means there's not enough money to operate the business. Many entrepreneurs will go into a business thinking, all I need is the money to get started, and they don't realize that they have to keep money flowing in that business to make it successful. A lot of them may have the vision and the idea, but they don't have managerial experience or incompetence. So then they fail, and they're not organized, and orders don't get shipped out. So that hurts their business. And then the third thing under failure rate is the inability to cope with growth. Growth often will require the owner to give up a lot of direct authority, because they're going to have to bring in people to help get their product out if it's just, hit the ground running type business. All right, now that you've kind of looked at whether you want to be, an entrepreneur and start a small business, you have to start with a general concept or idea. You have to create a business plan. And my next slide is going to be showing you about how to create a business plan. You have to devise a strategy for planning and development. And then you have to look at these 4 questions and make the decision. What is your form of ownership? We just went over that in chapter 4. Are you going to be a partnership? Are you going to be an LLC? Are you going to be a sole proprietor? Financing, where are you going to get your money? We talked about the equity financing, debt financing. Unless you have a rich grandparent that died and left you a lot of money, you've got to have money. Are you going to acquire an existing business? Or are you going to just start from scratch? Or have you considered buying a franchise? This one talks about the forms of business ownership, and we've talked about all of those in chapter 4, so I'm not going into depth on those for you. You also have to plan for your financial resources. Where are you going to get the money? Cash? Do you have the money? Or where are you going to obtain capital? You have to show these in your business plan. What are your financing options? Are you going to do equity financing or debt financing? Equity financing is referred to equity because the owner uses real personal assets rather than borrowing funds from outside sources. You can also obtain equity financing by finding investors, selling stocks to family members, friends, or employees. Equity financing is I'm getting the money from somewhere by selling something, my house. I'm gonna put my house up. I'm gonna sell stock, different things like that. Debt financing is where you borrow more than half. Collateral means that it's a financial interest in the property or fixtures or business. It's a guaranteed payment of the debt. Mortgage, you may have to provide personal property as collateral, and if the business fails, they can eventually come back, the bank or mortgage company or whoever you borrowed from, and they can claim or sell that collateral. A line of credit, it's an agreement by which a financial institution, a bank, a credit union promises to lend a business a predetermined sum of money on demand. Trade credit, this is where suppliers will allow the business to take possession of needed goods and service and then pay them back. Usually they do a 30-day or a 60-day net. So if I get in, if I had a nail salon and I went in and I bought all this nail polish and I bought it on net 30, I have 30 days before I have to pay that bill. And then bartering is trading their own products for goods or services offered by other businesses.
The advantages and disadvantages of debt and equity. If you have a business that is already generating cash flow and doing so on a regular enough basis, then debt is going to be your best option, because debt only requires a return of what was lent to you plus some interest. Equity, on the other hand, is advantageous for businesses where, at least in the early stage, you aren't going to be generating positive cash flow. You need that equity to help support you through that period as you're building up and getting to the cash flow positive area. And equity's biggest advantage is that you don't have to repay it, at least in terms of as an obligation. But the disadvantage to equity is it is unlimited upside. So once you break past that cash flow point, every dollar that you generate in that business will go to those equity owners, depending on how much ownership you provide. To give a simple example, if someone invests in half of your new business, half of all the profits or cash flows that you generate when you do generate them will go to that partner. So to the extent that you feel that that is too rich a price to pay for some funding up front, then that's probably the biggest minus.
Venture capitalists. Venture capitalists are people or organizations that agree to provide some funds for a new business in exchange for an ownership. And the next slide is going to give you to me, the most famous venture capitalists today. So let's talk about what you should do. Should you start from scratch, or should you buy an existing business? Starting from scratch can be very expensive, because one of the things is you have nothing to start with generally. So you not only have to obtain a place, you have to obtain your product, but you have to do some marketing, some promotional efforts to familiarize customers. If you purchase an existing business, you do have the advantage of a built-in network of customers, supplier, and distributors. It does reduce some of the guesswork with starting a business. But if you buy an existing business, you also take on any problems that that business may have. I think about a lot of the hair salons. People will buy an existing hair salon, and when they buy them, then they also are buying their customer database. Doesn't mean the customer has to keep coming, but they have access to those customers. You can also think about becoming a franchise owner. A franchise is a license that you purchase to sell another person's product or use their name. The franchisor is that company that sells the franchise. A franchisee is the purchase of a franchise, the purchaser. This slide shows the advantages and disadvantages of owning a franchise. And if you notice, the advantages outweigh the disadvantages a little bit. One of the big disadvantages in owning a franchise is the fees and profit sharing. Fees are very expensive. When you're looking at opening a franchise, for most of them, it's the minimum $100,000 to $250,000 just to get the rights to use their logo. So that's something you do have to think about, is if you want to be a franchisee. The next slide talks about the 10 best franchises to invest in. So watch this video. for just a few minutes. This slide came directly from our book, and it talked about the top 10 fastest growing franchises. And I found it interesting that this slide did not match the video we watched. And from what I could tell, that these were franchises that were hot during when the book was published, and the video showed a lot of the new franchises that are up and coming. This slide talks about, as a small business manager, there's help for you out there. You don't have to go it alone. For me, I like the SBA. If I was going to open up a business, that is what I would go to, is the SBA, because they're going to give you a lower interest rate. They're going to be there to help you get started. They're going to help you get a business plan. The things that some of you may not even know how to write a business plan. So this is just some of the help that's available for small business managers. This slide talks about some of the demographic trends, and if you are considering going into opening up your own business after you get out of college, these are some things that you might consider. First of all is the baby boomer generation. It represents 24% of the Americans. Some of the things we think about is that they're wealthy, but many small businesses don't actively pursue it. They've paid off their houses, their cars are paid off. Some of them are getting ready to retire. They've invested all their money, and so they have it. They like to travel. They want to, make sure their finances are taken care of. But one of the big things that I've noticed about the baby boomer generation is healthcare. Anything in the healthcare industry will do nothing but grow and succeed. If you look and when you're traveling around this week, look at how many new assisted livings have popped up. Every city has at least 2 or 3, and that's because baby boomers, they don't want to do housework. They don't want to do yard work. They want somebody to cook for them and clean for them. And they have the money, so they're just going to go and stay in a nice assisted living. So that's something to think about. The next one is the millennials and the Generation X. They number around 75 million, and I find it interesting that they're not solely concerned about money. They're concerned with advancement, recognition, their improved capability, and to work with this generation, you have to have direct, timely feedback and give them recognition. And I guess that most of you are not in this millennial generation. An untapped market for small business is the immigrants living in the U.S. now. This is an area that you can really get into, and you can, if you can find what their interests are, what it is that they want to put their money into, that is a way that you can have a small business and be successful in that. Some of the technology and economic trends, of course, is because of the wide availability of internet. There's so many new opportunities. Of course, we do now have an increase in service exports, and because of economic turbulence, that can be both an opportunity and a threat as long as you can react and change quickly. And then with the deregulation of the energy market and alternative fuels, that is a way of getting tapped into that market. And finally, making big businesses act small. Continuing success and competitiveness of small businesses has gotten the attention of large corporations. So they're beginning to look at what's making these smaller businesses tick. Large firms are beginning to emulate smaller ones in order to improve bottom line. And now they're beginning to downsize. They're reducing management layers, corporate staff, and work tasks to make their firm more flexible and resourceful. I know by the time you see this or hear this video, this won't be big news anymore. But on to the Today Show this morning, they were talking about how Amazon was eliminating 500 managerial positions. So that's what they're doing. They're beginning to downsize and get rid of some of those management layers. And then most big organizations have entrepreneurs, which are different from entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are generally for themselves. Entrepreneurs work within their organization to develop new innovations. So that is the end of chapter 5. On this slide, there are some discussion questions if you would like to look at them. With the end of chapter 5, you will have your Unit 2 exam, but also remember you do have your Learn Smart, your quizzes, and you do have a discussion board and a case study. Thank you, and let me know if you have any questions.